Every Wednesday, Tobago Talks, and when Tobago Talk, we listen. This morning, joining me, Martin George, wearing the cap this morning of the chairman of the Tobago Business Chamber. And it's a very important one indeed, because when we consider what transpired on Sunday and the impact not only on Carl as a business, but businesses and passengers, there is so much to break down and dissect this morning. We welcome Mr. George. Great to see you as always, and thanks for the time. I look forward to your perspective.
Yes, hi, good morning to you, Jason, and good morning, Trinidad and Tobago.
Talk to me in terms of, before we can get into the passengers, just those who are moving to and fro for recreation. What about, let's deal with the business first and foremost. What's the feedback you receive from business interests from Trinidad and mostly Tobago concerning Sunday's, cancellations?
Well, Jason, I think, first of all, most people were not happy by the reactions you got from passengers who swore and vowed that they will never come back to Tobago. So Tobago as a whole got a bad rap as a result of this fiasco and debacle.
I think that was probably just emotions, people just, speaking out of emotion, because to say that go back to Tobago, that's not feasible.
It might be, Jason, but the fact of the matter is that, if you are expecting a nice vacation with your family, you all book your flights for what is supposed to be a 15-minute flight, and then you end up in this type of traumatic situation, one could understand the level of frustration and maybe the emotive responses, but the reality is that yet again, we have seen in this scenario, and this wasn't just local, this was now regional and international, there is some disconnect between the way the national airline does business and the delivery of its services to the public. And that, I think, is our main concern. Whatever your issue is with the pilots, Jason, let's just be clear. I do not want to be flying with a disgruntled, unhappy pilot or co-pilot. Let's be clear on that.
Yes.
I want my pilot to be happy and satisfied. I don't want him up in the cockpit and, he's focusing on his finances instead of flying. He's supposed to be well settled. His mind is supposed to be at ease. He's supposed to be at rest. He's not supposed to be under any kind of stress in that regard while he is having the lives of persons in his hands while flying. So, we need to understand that, look, safety is a major issue. Carl has had an excellent track record of safety over the years. You don't want to jeopardize this or put this at risk if you're in a constant war of attrition with those who are in the cockpit. You want them focused on their flying, right? You don't want a distracted, dejected, or depressed pilot flying you. Why would you want that?
What you thought of the contingency plan on Sunday? I know, obviously, as you said, many would have been frustrated. You plan your nice weekend with your family. You can't get back on the 15-minute flight. But I heard there would have been an alternative. You go down to the port and take the ferry. A special ceiling, apparently, was put in place to ensure people got back to Trinidad.
Right. And Jason, my question would be for those who had international connections to New York, to Toronto, and, to Orlando, to Fort Lauderdale, wherever, what was the contingency for them? Which ferry was taking them to their destinations? This was not just local, So we appreciate, yes, that the Port Authority and the Trinidad and Tobago transport system, they, kicked in and they stepped up to assist. But the fact of the matter is that this was something not just local, it was regional and international. And that's why I am saying we ought to have heard from the CEO and the top management of Caribbean Airlines. They ought to have come forth and faced the music. Jason, when you look at it internationally, if we are aspiring to international standards, to first world standards, then we ought to do things in the same manner that it is done in first world countries. You saw when in 2021 December, when there was the massive backup and backlog of flights in the US, right? What occurred? You saw the government in the US, they pulled all these CEOs and hauled them before Congress to account for what caused these flight cancellations. The CEO of American Airlines, the CEO of United Airlines, the CEO of Southwest Airlines, Delta, their chief operating officer, they were all dragged before the Congress to give an explanation what caused these massive flight cancellations. So I'm saying if these CEOs of these major airlines could be, brought to the public to account for airline cancellations, what is wrong with our CEO being called upon to account? Why is no one asking any questions? Why is the government not asking questions of the management of CAL? Why is the government not asking questions of the CEO? Why is the board not asking any questions? In fact, what is the board doing? Is it that they're just sitting, waiting for the next monthly meeting where they could get together and knock champagne glasses and collect their stipend and plan their next free trip on CAL? This is absolutely ridiculous. We have had no level of proper accountability for this fiasco.
Well, Martin, I suspect there will be an ongoing, and I suspect there must be an ongoing investigation.
But Jason, thus far we've heard nothing. And what I'm saying is, if we look at international standards, look at last December when there was the debacle with Southwest Airlines again with flight cancellations. Remember the chief executive officer of Southwest Airlines, Mr. Bob Jordan. He came forth and he gave his mea culpa. He apologized to the public, to the nation, to all the travelers. And he said he is accountable for what happened and he takes responsibility to try and fix it. So what I'm saying is that we need to move to that sort of level of accountability. You don't just issue a bland sort of PR statement, which is what we saw coming out of CAL, signed by nobody, not issued by anybody, nobody's name on it.
But Martin, in reality, this was an industrial kind of action scenario, even though it's not confirmed and they're suggesting, well, that's not the case, because under the union stipulations, pilots cannot engage in such action. There are severe consequences for such an action. So, in essence, the 54, because again, I'm guided here by The Guardian, the 54 pilots that called in sick on Sunday, they're just saying it might be a situation of just coincidence, but we could all read through the fine print here.
Listen, and no one is trying to paint it as anything other than that. The reality, however, is that this is not a new issue. Since the pandemic, remember, there have been issues with the pilots and with staffing at CAL. Remember when coming out of the pandemic, when flights were increasing and other airlines were hiring, they were expanding, and they were looking for staff. That was the time that CAL decided to lay off people. That was the time that they decided to retrench people. So, you have to ask questions of the management of CAL. They cannot escape that accountability as to what have you been doing with this airline? What is your game plan? How has it reached to this crisis? So yes, I understand that, okay, it could not be coincidence that all the pilots got sick at the same time. But the reality is that this is not a new issue. This is a mismanagement issue that has been bedeviling this airline for, quite some time. Then you look at the question of the profligate spending that has occurred at the airline over the years. You look at the financial disasters they've engaged in. Think of, let's not forget purchasing Air Jamaica. Imagine you are a drowning, struggling airline and you're going to save another drowning, struggling airline. What sense that makes? That is like one drunk man trying to lead another drunk man and help him to go home. The two of them lost forever.
Well, I guess the frustration you feel is based on, I know, the impact it would have had on business, this particular scenario. And I want to just take it a little bit further afield really fast, because even and this is not even to do with CAL, this is to do with Inter-Caribbean. The Prime Minister of St. Vincent, Honorable Gonzalez, he is totally disappointed and frustrated with Inter-Caribbean and their, the issues coming out of all the islands there from St. Vincent way up to Antigua, and they're suggesting to even try to put a little injection back into LIAT and have a reform the LIAT as it was. So this issue that we're going through with rostering and pilots and people being disgruntled is not only a Caribbean Airlines scenario, it's one that seems to be very prevalent throughout the entire region. And I think it's a greater conversation to ensure that our bridge, first and foremost here at home, is sorted out, the air bridge, but also the regional conversation concerning airline travel, the price, and I guess the professionalism, flights being on time and the level of professionalism.
Listen, I think that this is actually a wonderful opportunity for Caribbean Airlines to really be established as the Caribbean Airline. So in other words, this is where governance and leadership is supposed to kick in. You are supposed to be sitting down with the same Ralph Gonzalez and saying, hey, Ralphie, boy, listen, put up $1 billion and we will ensure that St. Vincent is serviced on a daily basis. We will buy planes. We will have money to have pilots, to have stewardesses, etc. You talk to St. Kitts, you talk to other islands, Dominica and stuff like that. It can't be that they're getting a free ride, that you're simply trying to facilitate them, because of course they need the connectivity. And we understand that, look, yes, you need to supply air routes to these islands, but in return, they have to pay their fair share. So in other words, you have to ensure that they now make a contribution, because you want to benefit from Caribbean Airlines and not pay your share. They have to pay their share. So that's where I think we ought to have that type of conversation, Jason. And I agree with you, and I have no difficulty with that. But when you have basically the brunt of the burden being falling on the Trinidad and Tobago taxpayer, and the Trinidad and Tobago government, and then you expand it into new routes, you expand it to take on St. Kitts, to take on Caracas, to take on Cuba, and then now you coming out in a scenario such as this and saying you have resource constraints, then it's not making sense, because if you have resource constraints, you could not be expanding into new routes in the first place.
Well, from my investigation, I heard that some of the pilots who were taken offline went back online, and even some of the over 60s are being, they're bringing them back into the fold. So I know they're trying to, well, at least from what I understand, trying to get more personnel and more pilots to fly the said aircraft. But again, I'm looking at The Guardian this morning, and the pilots themselves are suggesting that the poor crew rostering is the source of the particular problem.
Right, I saw that, and again, that comes back to the question of management, and that's why I keep saying it's a management challenge. The pilots do not set their own rosters. It's the management that has to do so. And of course, when you are doing your roster, you must have backup pilots in the event that someone is genuinely sick or genuinely unable to carry out their duty, that you have someone in reserve who can fly. That's how you do it in the airline industry. So therefore, it comes back again to the question of management. And that's why I'm saying we must have some proper accountability and explanation from the management of CAL as to why this occurred, and some assurances that, look, hey, we have things in place so that it will not occur again. So if it means that you have to go back to the negotiating table, if it means that you have to now look at some creative ways of settling these wage negotiations with the pilots, because they've been outstanding for quite some time, then you do so. You can't take this high-handed, dismissive approach where you feel, well, you are above all and untouchable, and you're not accountable to anyone. That cannot be, and that's what I keep saying in Trinidad and Tobago. We have to understand that the persons we put in positions of power, positions of trust, they have a duty to perform. And if they don't perform, then they need to account as to why they are not performing. That's simple, basic economic strategy all over the world. It's simple management policy all over the world.
Martin, you think we'll ever get it together? Because this air bridge, sea bridge issue, it's been going on since I was in khaki pants and tall socks and a primary school shirt. I'll give you a chance. We have about just 30 seconds to just give some closing remarks.
And the thing is, Jason, there seems to be no resolution or no solution in sight. I'm not even sure, you have events coming up such as the Tobago Carnival. Carl should be announcing from now, hey, listen, we've put on additional flights for the Tobago Carnival because we know people want to come to, enjoy themselves. You don't wait until a week before or some days before the event to then say, oh, well, we have additional flights. That's not how people plan things anymore. Especially if you're talking about international visitors, they need to apply to their jobs for time off. They need to apply for vacation. They need to put things in place with their homes, their families, whatever. So therefore, they can't do these last minute things where 2 days before you announcing, oh, we put on our extra flight. Come on, that's dark ages kind of functioning.
Yeah.
We're in the 21st century where everybody has access to internet, everybody has access to connectivity. Why is it you can't get it right?
Martin, as always, thank you. You're very passionate this morning, and it's one, it's what I know that, you know, based on your particular seat, being the chairman there for the business interests in Tobago, I know you hear and feel the frustration of many. We'll get a chance to touch base, and we'll elaborate some more, I'm sure, somewhere down the road. Have a great one, and we will meet up soon.